Welcome to presentation 11 in the series where we're looking at the book of Deuteronomy. As usual, let's just reflect back on where we've been in the previous presentation. They're facing very many unfamiliar situations. Moses is preparing them for what lay ahead, the events and the future, and he gives them God's directions to guide them forward. They're given for a specific context, God's people entering a new phase in their national life, at a specific time in history. They weren't given us rules that we can simply rip out and enforce today. They were given us directions for that situation, but they do illustrate fundamental unchanging principles because God does not change. And our task is to interpret the directions in their context and then look for the underlying principles which will guide us for today. Moses concludes the directions by saying this: "The Lord your God commands you this day to follow these decrees and laws. Carefully observe them with all your heart and with all your soul. You have declared this day that the Lord is your God, and that you will walk in obedience to him, that you will keep his decrees, commands, and laws, that you will listen to him. And the Lord has declared this day that you are his people, his treasured possession as he promised, and that you are to keep all his commands. He has declared he will set you in praise, fame, and honor high above all the nations he has made, and that you be a people holy to the Lord your God, as he promised." That word there means directions for these circumstances. That describes the boundary conditions for our lives. Live within them, you flourish. And that speaks of how we treat each other in our society. Thinking and action, it encompasses them all. And we noted that last little bit, quite complicated in the original language. So let's just look at that in the original language and just take it apart slightly, because there's a great truth in that part of that sentence. For praise, we live the God way, the Jesus way. Others admire it. It points to God. God's reputation is enhanced. Indeed, we're living lives that reflect the beauty of the life of Jesus. That's God's way. And we're set apart, which is what holiness means, by sheer life quality. That's what God wanted for his people then, and he still does today. But we need to remember, God takes us as people, but he needs and seeks our response. And our response is, follow my directions. I'll show you the best way of life. And then God expresses himself, when we live God's way, to the world round about. Fundamental principle that we need to grasp amongst God's people in the West, particularly today. And that's what it means by a people holy to the Lord, set apart to live his way, the Jesus way. And God's glory is seen in the way we live. That's how God shows himself to the world around. It means seeing things from the perspective of others. It means seeking to bring benefit to others. We could describe that as empathy, and that is love. But empathy derives from love. Now let's move on into the next section. Background history here. That's who the people were that had been rescued by God from slavery. God had promised a great destiny for the descendants of Abraham. Many generations later, this was coming to be. He rescued them from slavery. He protected and provided in a terrible situation going through the desert. And he provided the outstanding leadership through Moses, supported by his colleagues. The reaction? Persistent rebellion. And before we judge, perhaps if we'd been in their position, almost certainly we'd have done exactly the same. God was patient. He allowed a generation just to die out, and then the children and grandchildren could be led safely to the land. God now gives his directions through Moses to the people, preparing them for what lay ahead, which is what Deuteronomy is all about, what faced them as they entered into the land. That's the background. And with that in mind, we move into chapter 27. Moses and the elders of Israel commanded the people, "Keep all these commands that I give you today. When you've crossed the Jordan into the land the Lord your God is giving you, set up some large stones and coat them with plaster. Write in them all the words of this law when you've crossed over to enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, a land flowing with milk and honey, just as the Lord, the God of your ancestors, promised you. And when you've crossed the Jordan, set up these stones in Mount Ebal, as I commanded you today. Coat them with plaster. Build there an altar to the Lord your God, an altar of stones. Do not use any iron tool in them. Build the altar of the Lord your God with stones from the field, and offer burnt offerings on it to the Lord your God. Sacrifice fellowship offerings there, eating them and rejoicing in the presence of the Lord your God. And you shall write very clearly all the words of this law on these stones you have set up." Then Moses and the Levitical priests said to all Israel, "Be silent, Israel, and listen. You have now become the people of the Lord your God. Obey the Lord your God and follow his commands and decrees that I give you today." The word there describes the clear commands of God. God is laying down clear commands so that our lives can reflect his nature. If you like, our lives reflect the way of Jesus. That speaks of the boundary conditions, so that in our personal lives there are things that are boundaries for us, that we don't go beyond. Now that's an Egyptian plaster, Egyptian practice, plastering these stones. And they needed to write on the law onto it as a permanent record. Remember, this was a time when very few could read or write. This would give a permanent record that those who could read and write could refer to. Now, Israel didn't have iron tools at that time, so just use the stones that are there. Otherwise you've got to wait to buy them from neighbouring groups round about. Focusing on the last little point. Be silent, Israel. Sometimes we need to stop whatever we're doing just to listen to what God's saying. Then we can listen and take it in. And the word listen there implies we're going to follow it. We're committed to doing that. There's the reminder given to the people, you have now become the people of the Lord your God. God's calling you to live for him, to reflect his nature in your behavior and the way you treat each other and your lifestyle. God would do it all for them. He'd brought them out of slavery to this position. He would provide everything they needed for that task, that they could live the Jesus way. But they had to respond. They had to be willing and say, I want to go that way. I'm committed to going that way. How important we live God's way. And we're committed to following God's clear commands and the life boundary conditions that are set out. Wonderful principles that are laid out in that little section. Moving on. On the same day Moses commanded the people, when you've crossed the Jordan, these tribes shall stand on Mount Gerizim to bless the people, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Joseph, and Benjamin. And these tribes shall stand on Mount Ebal to pronounce curses, Reuben, Gad, Asher, Zebulun, Dan, and Naphtali. A map makes a bit of sense of this. There's the Lake of Galilee, and there's the Dead Sea, and the Jordan flows from the Galilee to the Dead Sea. There's Shechem, a small community. There's Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. That's the rough positions in the land. Not huge mountains, about 1,000 meters high. An important east-west trade route passed between the mountains, so when they crossed the land to go further towards the west, they would have to go through that pass. The ancient town of Shechem. And between the two mountains is a natural amphitheatre, so that people could be heard and people could see. Historically, Abraham had built an altar there when he first came into the land. Jacob had renewed the altar, described later, when he was returning to the land. So this location had a long association with God's promise of the land. And it was approximately central in the land. But it's puzzling. The whole stretch is puzzling. That's the bit we read a moment or two. Pronounce blessings. Oh, we like that. Pronounce curses. We don't like that. What is this all about? Back to our picture, but on a bigger scale. The ark was placed between the two, and the Levites, that's only the subgroup that looked after the ark, would be beside it. Tribes to the north, tribes to the south, and the numbers would not be absolutely enormous, otherwise they could never hear. They pronounced the blessings, they pronounced the curses. Now the word curses there, it has the meaning of holding in contempt. It's almost like a non-blessing, the absence of a blessing, something that just doesn't happen, a good thing that doesn't happen. And there's no halfway house, it's black and white. It's either blessings or curses. That comes from obedience, and that comes from disobedience. We need to tease this out a little bit further. Now this list of curses that's given here starts with this one. Cursed is anyone who makes an idol, a thing detestable to the Lord, the work of skilled hands, and sets it up in secret. Then all the people shall say Amen. That just means we agree, we support this, we stand with it. It's too easy, even for God's people, that actually something or someone has become more important than living the Jesus way. Something in our life. Could be in our job, could be in our home, could be in our relationships, could be in our reputation, could be very subtle. But it's done in secret. It moves on through a list. 10 further areas of behavior are cursed. These are going to lead to non-blessings. So if you want blessing, don't go that way. And it ends with this one, a kind of catch-all. Cursed is anyone who does not uphold the words of this law by carrying them out. And then all the people shall say Amen. We support this, we agree with this, we're committing ourselves to it. Again, cursing. The word there is not the same word. It carries the idea almost of saying the inevitable consequences arising from not following God's directions. God's got principles in the way he runs things. If we fall foul of these, we lose out in the blessings. The non-blessing, if you like. The inevitable consequences. Words of this law. The word law is the idea of principles, guidelines, framework. Communicated in language, set out by God for quality, fulfilled lifestyle. Not restrictive, not negative, but to enrich our lives. You see, upholding the words of this law is seen and expressed in doing it. Not lip service, but obedience means action. So we can see something of the significance of blessings and curses in this. Back to the puzzling instruction in this. Let's look at these curses. Secretly worshipping another deity. Something or someone is more important than God in our life. Undermining the family. Exploiting others for our own gain. Similar but expressed in a different way. Denying justice to the have-nots of society. Too easy for that to go on. We blame the have-nots for having not. Then it relates to 4 sexual aberrations which seem strange to us, but at least in strong measure they reflect Canaanite abuses of sex. They had a fertility religion, and sexual activities would take on a major part of that in their temples. And then the sanctity of life undermined, directly or indirectly. So there's some sort of sense in this list, although it reads strangely to us with our logical Western mindset. But there's something about all these things, when you look at them, they're essentially in secret. And therefore they're not open to the legal justice, they're not obvious to wider society. We think we can get away with things in secret. No, you'll undermine what it's all about, says God. Into chapter 28. And I can only describe this as a great chapter, and this may surprise you. It carries a vital and central meaning for the followers of Jesus today, but, strangely, it's rarely if ever taught in most churches today. Something adrift there. It involves strange ideas like blessings and curses. We're back to these things, and the problems with language and the subtlety with which these words are used in the original language, where there were multiple words for curses. 14 verses for blessings, 54 for the curses. And it seems to have God warning the people that he will send disasters on the people. Does a God of love send disasters? Illness, disease, war, pestilence, plague? Does God do that, a God of love? As a result of that, people who want to criticize the Bible, who already made up their mind that the Bible is a load of rubbish, they will go to a book like this, a chapter of this book, and they will rip it out of context, usually using an old version where it's even more misleading, and then they take it as a rule book and mock us today. Let's see what this chapter actually says in the original, in its context, what the words mean and what its significance is today. We need to be equipped to stand against Bible critics, but it has a great significance for our lifestyle today as the followers of Jesus. First 6 verses, and then verses 15 to 19. Look at the first 6. If you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully follow all his commands that I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations on earth. All these blessings will come on you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. You'll be blessed in the city, blessed in the country. The fruit of your womb will be blessed, the crops of your land and the young of your livestock, the calves of your herd and the lambs of your flocks. Agricultural lifestyle would flourish. Your basket and your kneading trough will be blessed. Adequate food. You'll be blessed when you come in and blessed when you go out. All your activities, you'll be blessed. Things will go really well. Now look at verse 15 to 19. However, if you do not obey the Lord your God, do not carefully follow all his commands and decrees I am giving you today, all these curses will come on you and overtake you. You'll be cursed in the city, cursed in the country. Your basket and your kneading trough will be cursed. The fruit of your womb be cursed, the crops of your land, and the calves of your herds, and the lambs of your flocks. You'll be cursed when you come in, cursed when you go out. It won't work. The non-blessing, struggling to survive. The contrast is there. First 6 verses introduce the blessings, 15 to 19 introduce the curses. Fully obey, it actually translates listen, listening. In Hebrew, listen, listening, when they use the same word in 2 forms, it stresses it, and fully obey captures the meaning beautifully. Commands there are God's clear commands. They're not confusing. Follow them. Will come on you, it's got the idea of will overtake you. It's almost as if blessings are chasing after us. When we go God's way, when we commit ourselves to live His way for His glory, the Jesus way, it'll just happen automatically. More than we can ever cope with, the blessings, they were so great. The curses, it's the same word there, it'll be exactly reversed. Disaster after disaster, failure after failure will just pursue us endlessly. But who's the you? Let's look at that a bit further. Who does it apply to? Context, he's preparing the people for what faced them as they entered a new phase in national life. He's reminded them, God has chosen you for a task, to live for Him, to make Him known to the people groups round about. They are God's people for that task. And He's teaching them, as long as they pursued the destiny God had for them, to be God's people, to live the Jesus way in our modern language, God would be there for them. Blessings would just chase after them. Provision, security would be part of their lives. Purpose of it? So they may make an impact in other people groups, a positive impact, a challenging impact. They would point other people groups and draw them to come into relationship with their Creator. That's their life task. Lifestyles that reflect the nature of God Himself. Now that is mind-blowing. He can do it in us if we're willing to let Him do it in us. That's what Moses is saying. And in this way God is being made known to the wider world around. Other people see in us something of the divine nature. Now if you look at the history of the nation, it shows their failure again and again and again, especially their leadership. But it also shows the success of the nation, because from that nation was born Jesus, who lived the life of God in perfection and brought the revelation of God to the wider world, and is still doing it. God took the initiative, and He always does. He rescued them, protected and provided for them. They were undefeated by the opposing forces, and they didn't earn it, a rabble of slaves, and they certainly did not deserve it. They rebelled continuously, but God had a long-term purpose. To make Himself known to other people groups, and to do it through the quality of lifestyle of this people group. And He promises protection and provision to His people for that purpose. But He does require response. Because if we don't respond in obedience, we cannot live the quality lifestyle that God wants from us, and we therefore cannot reveal God's nature to the wider world. He wants us to live, in modern language, the Jesus way, so that others can see what Jesus is all about. That's what God requires. If we fail to respond positively, we choose to do things our own way, then the protection and provision is withdrawn. That's the curses. Protection and provision, they're no longer needed. You're not doing it. You're not attempting to do it. Now, it's not to say that we will always be 100% successful. We do make mistakes, but we have to be committed to do it 100%. Then the protection and provision is there for us. But if we're not committed, and we think we can do it ourselves, and we alter things to go our own way, protection and provision is no longer there for us. But it's for the purpose of living God's way, and thereby making God known to the wider world. And if you look at the history of the people of God since the days of Jesus, we always make an impact when we live the Jesus way. And we do not make an impact when we live our way. And that's the context, that's the meaning. It's addressed to God's people in that circumstance and for that purpose. If you fully obey the Lord your God and carefully all follow his commands that I give you today, the Lord your God will set you high above all the nations on earth. All these blessings will come on you and accompany you if you obey the Lord your God. Blessed in the city, blessed in the country. The fruit of your womb will be blessed, the crops of your land, the young of your livestock will be blessed. Your basket and your kneading trough will be blessed. You'll be blessed when you come in and blessed when you go out. The Lord will grant that the enemies who rise up against you will be defeated before you. They will come at you from one direction, flee from you in seven. The Lord will send out a blessing on your barns and everything you put your hand to. The Lord will establish you as his holy people, as he promised you an oath. If you keep the commands of the Lord your God and walk in obedience to him, then all the peoples on earth will see that you're called by the name of the Lord. They will fear you. That's respect, or that's what the word means. The Lord will open the heavens, the storehouse of his bounty, to send rain on your land in season, to bless all the work of your hands. You will lend to many nations, will borrow from none. The Lord will make you the head, not the tail. If you pay attention to the commands of the Lord your God that I give you this day and carefully follow them, you will always be at the top, never at the bottom. That takes the bit we read at the beginning and expands it. I've just picked out some of it. Blessings everywhere. The meaning of them, I attempted just to capture it on the right-hand side of the table. The reputation of God's people. High. Held high. Blessing in every location where we are. A secure future in our children. Secure future in the basis of life, food provision, all that we need for life. Blessings all the time. The opposition will not win. A life centered in God, but centered on serving others. And all our enterprises are successful because they're all aiming at living the Jesus way. Not pushed around endlessly by the events of life. And implied throughout is health. God will keep us fit for whatever God has for us to do. When we set our minds to do it, he will keep us fit and equipped to be able to do it. Verse 2. But notice, if you obey the Lord your God, it's all conditional. The blessings will come on us in order that we can fulfill what God wants to do through us. We've got to do it God's way. He will establish you as his holy people if you keep the commands of the Lord your God and walk in obedience to him. Then all the peoples on earth will see you are called by the name of the Lord, and they will fear, respect you. That's God's long-term purpose. It's what he wants from God's people then and now. And this bit that finishes off the section, we could summarize it that way. The people of God will offer leadership Jesus pictures us as being the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Leadership to wider society and societies, not dependent on others, because we're dependent on God, who will bless us beyond anything that we would ever need. What a glorious picture, and it's still true today. We've got to watch. If people take it literalistically and rip the verses out and try to make them as rules for the world today, then you can see blessings and curses in terms of rewards and punishments. That's not the context, nor is it the emphasis of the book of Deuteronomy, and the language that's used and the context in which it's used make that very clear. It's a misrepresentation, but you hear it. A better way forward, the picture is that God acts. He's giving the land as an opportunity to serve the world by living and showing something of the divine nature. But when we don't commit ourselves to it, and we think we know better than God, and we don't live our lives the way He's laid out for us, the blessings simply vanish. Call that curses if you like. The non-blessings. We struggle. But it's all set in a context where God acts and seeks our response so that His purposes can be worked out through us to bless others. God wants to make Himself known to the world through people who will respond to Him, and He will equip us to do that, to bless us to do that. But if we start on the road and then decide we're going to do it our way, the blessings vanish. They're all conditioned on our responses. That's the purpose, a glorious future, and making Himself known to those round about. And we do it by our life quality, not by shouting at them and criticizing them. But if we don't have the life quality, the task's impossible. Our lifestyles undermine anything we might want to say. Therefore the blessings are no longer needed, and we live under the curse. Now this is not a promise that nothing bad can happen to God's people. What it is, it's a promise that God will provide everything for us in order to pursue His life task for us through us. When we're living for Him, committed to living for Him, the provision will be there for us. The blessings are there. It's up to us to be willing to respond. If you look at it overall, there's kind of two directions. The prosperity of the nation, the picture and the blessings there, and the opposite in curses is the internal blessings in God's people. But then the status of the nation, their impact on people groups round about. We live Jesus before the watching world. Stop for a minute, and in the West, let's just stop and look at the followers of Jesus today. What's our reputation before the watching world? You can see it in the media, especially the television media. And then ask the question in our groups, are we internally blessed as described here? That's why this chapter is so dramatically important, because it gives us the key and the basis for breaking through into something more wonderful in the future. We've got to put our house in order as God's people and get back to the priority of living the Jesus way before the watching world. Now the curses. The words there show the inevitability. If we choose not to do it God's way, then God's provision, God's protection, security, they're no longer there. And the picture is of disastrous diseases, a population decline, a loss of land. We're dispersed among other people groups. We're reduced to worshipping the creation, the loss of peace and security that we experience, and minds filled with despair and longing because we know we've missed out somehow and we're no longer in control of our own destiny. That's the picture that's given in this section. We'll read a bit of it in a moment. Again, let's stop. If you look at that list there, and look at some of the things that are going on in God's people in the West today, where we're being denigrated and marginalized. Our numbers are declining. Our influence is largely gone. We're starting to worship our religious systems, what we do, or even our buildings. Many amongst God's people today, filled with despair, filled with longing. We long for something better. This chapter holds the answer. It holds the key. It's why it's so important for today. From the latter part, however, if you do not obey the Lord your God, do not carefully follow all his commands and decrees I am giving you today, all these curses will come on you and overtake you. The Lord will send on you curses, confusion, and rebuke you in everything you put your hand to, till you are destroyed and come to sudden ruin because of the evil you have done in forsaking him. The Lord will cause you to be defeated before your enemies. You'll be unsuccessful in everything you do. All these curses will come on you. They will pursue you and overtake you until you are destroyed, because you did not obey the Lord your God and observe the commands and decrees he gave you. You didn't do it his way. The Lord will bring a nation against you from far away, from the ends of the earth, like an eagle swooping down. They'll lay siege to all the cities throughout your land until the high fortified walls in which you trust fall down, depending on creation. The Lord will send fearful plagues on you and your descendants, you who are as numerous as the stars in the sky, but be left but few in number, because you did not obey the Lord your God. Just as it pleased the Lord to God to make you prosper and increase in number, so it will please him to ruin and destroy you. You'll be uprooted from the land you are entering to possess. No point having the land, no point having the blessing, when you're not doing what God wants, his long-term plan. Then the Lord will scatter you among all the nations, from one end of the earth to the other. There you will worship other gods. Among those nations you'll find no repose, no resting place for the sole of your foot. There the Lord will give you an anxious mind, eyes weary with longing, and a despairing heart. The word there speaks of non-blessings. Come and you overtake you, send in you. God's ultimately in control, but there's an inevitability. There's kind of spiritual laws coming in here. God will provide everything we need for us to be enabled to fulfill what he wants for us to do, to make him known by our life quality to those around. When we choose not to follow that direction and not to follow his directions, there's an inevitability. Hence God sends. It's not God deliberately sending something nasty to us. It's just the protection is gone, if you like. The security is gone. It's a non-blessing. The word destroy there is a word that carries the sense of a power base thrown down. Basically, were rendered ineffective, and that's why they lost the land. And they lost it permanently in AD 70. Because in the end of the day, this people group rebelled, and through their leadership, they rebelled and rejected the final one who came from God, Jesus himself. The land is no longer relevant. Whoever owns it today. That picture there is frighteningly true. And you can see it historically amongst God's people in the days of the Jewish nation, and when they lost the land to the Romans. But you can see it also amongst God's people in parts in the West today, are longing, because deep down we know we've lost it. You see, by choosing to do it our way, the purpose for our existence is gone. So we're looking for some alternative destiny. We have no other destiny. Therefore despair develops. What a sad picture, but it's reflected in part in the church in the West today. Chapter 29 now. These are the terms of the covenant the Lord commanded Moses to make with the Israelites in Moab, in addition to the covenant he made with them at Horeb, Mount Sinai. He summoned all the Israelites and said to them, Your eyes have seen all that the Lord did in Egypt to Pharaoh, to all his officials, and to all his land. With your own eyes you saw those great trials, those signs and great wonders. But to this day the Lord has not given you a mind that understands, or eyes that see, or ears that hear. Yet the Lord says, During the 40 years that I led you through the wilderness, your clothes did not wear out, nor did the sandals on your feet. You ate no bread and drank no wine or other fermented drink. I did this so that you might know that I am the Lord your God. I provided for you, he said. Great depth in the meaning of that sentence in the original. Only God can bring spiritual insight. But he can only do it even when a person wants to see spiritually. Here's an opportunity for each of us, and individually and in our groups, to talk to God and to ask him, open our eyes to see, open our ears to hear. We want to see it the way you see it. We want to see it spiritually. When you reached this place, Sihon king of Heshbon and Og king of Bashan came out to fight against you. We defeated them. We took the land and gave as an inheritance to the Reubenites, the Gadites, and the half-tribe of Manasseh. The whole thing, the whole stretch above there, is based on what actually happened. Faith is never blind faith nor irrational belief. Too much of that around in the world today. Our faith is based on our response to God, and it's rooted in objective historical events. This people group saw it all. They'd lived through it. God acts. He calls us to respond. Moving on again. Carefully follow the terms of this covenant so you may prosper in everything you do. All of you are standing today in the presence of the Lord your God, your leaders and chief men, your elders and officials, and all the men of Israel, together with your children and your wives and the foreigners living in your camps who chop your wood and carry your water. You're standing here in order to enter into a covenant with the Lord your God, a covenant the Lord is making with you this day and sealing with an oath, to confirm you this day as his people, that he may be your God as he promised you and as he swore to your fathers Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. I am making this covenant with its oath not only with you who are standing here with us today in the presence of the Lord your God, but also with those who are not here today, future generations. There's the covenant. God acts, but God seeks our response. He wants us to live under his direction. That's life to its greatest and fullest. He wants to reach the world through us, and he'll provide everything for us for that end. Moving on again, you yourselves know how we lived in Egypt, how we passed through the countries on the way here. You saw among them their detestable images and idols of wood and stone, of silver and gold. Make sure that there is no man or woman, clan or tribe among you today whose heart turns away from the Lord your God to go and worship the gods of those nations. Make sure there is no root among you that produces such a bitter poison, can corrupt the whole of society. When such a person hears the words of this oath and they invoke a blessing on themselves, thinking, I'll be safe even though I persist in going my own way, they will bring disaster on the watered land as well as on the dry. The Lord will never be willing to forgive them. His wrath and zeal will burn against them. If we deliberately take a decision not to do it God's way, we've lost the blessings. All the curses written in this book will fall on them, the non-blessings. The Lord will blot out their names from under heaven. They lose out everything. The Lord will single them out from all the tribes of Israel for disaster, according to all the curses of the covenant written in this book of the law. Your children who follow you in later generations and foreigners who come from distant lands will see the calamities that fall on the land, the disease which the Lord has afflicted it. God removes the blessings, he removes the protection, he removes the provision. These things will happen. The whole land will be a burning waste of soil and sulphur, nothing planted, nothing sprouting, no vegetation growing. It will be like the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboim, which the Lord overthrew in fierce anger. All the nations will ask, why has the Lord done this to this land? Why this fierce burning anger? And the answer will be, It is because this people abandoned the covenant of the Lord, the God of their ancestors, the covenant he made with them when he brought them out of Egypt. They went off and worshipped other gods and bowed down to them. We put something in place of God, gods they did not know, gods he had not given them. Therefore the Lord's anger burned against this land, so that he brought on it all the curses written in this book. In furious anger and great wrath the Lord uprooted them from their land and thrust them into another land, as it is now. And it happened in subsequent history, and it happened finally and completely in AD 70. It's all here. This seems to focus more on individuals. We think we can do what we like. We do think we don't affect other people. But our rebellion starts to spread insidiously in the wider community. And you can see that in some of the things that have happened in our church groups in the last decades. Everybody suffers, and those who are faithful end up being tarred with the same brush because of their rebellions. But those who start this, who took the decision, carry great responsibility. We must recognize that individuals can create havoc for wider society. You can see it in the late 19th century when in theological colleges in the West, people went galloping away with their own agendas in order to get a reputation and a fame for themselves. And the people of God have suffered ever since. And oh yes, you can see it in the devastation caused by someone like Hitler or Stalin. You can see it in the devastation caused by some world leaders today. They can create havoc for wider societies. They can split societies and destroy the unity. And the faithful and rebellious are all affected equally. Chapter 29 finishes with these words. The secret things belong to the Lord our God, but the things revealed belong to us and to our children forever, that we may follow all the words of this law. Words of this law, the principles for quality living as expressed in words. We're living for God. We've committed ourselves to living the Jesus way. We don't know all the answers, but God shows his people what they need to know. That's what it's saying. But the central choice then and for us today is which way are we going to go. We commit ourselves to live following God's directions, or we think we know better and choose life to live for ourselves. We're living for our religious systems, and we've created systems that suit us very nicely, but they're not God's systems. That's God's goal, and that only comes from obedience. And by the power of the Spirit upon us, the way of Jesus is seen in us. It all comes together. Let me just pick up a little bit and fade out the rest. When we follow all the words of this law, when we do it God's way, the principles for quality living, not a rule book, principles for quality living, we make God known to the wider world. And it comes from obedience, committing ourselves to live that way. God set up a covenant with his people, and he does it today. He takes us as people. We don't earn it. We don't deserve it. Jesus does it for us. And that's what he asks. He wants to make himself known to the wider watching world. And he'll provide everything we need to fulfill his task for us. But if we turn from the conditions, we forfeit that provision and protection. Curses are inevitable. It's the non-blessings. We've got to go back to this and experience the blessings, not the curses that are so often hindering us and battering us amongst God's people in the West today. This has been hard going, but these chapters hold the answers for us today. And we need in our groups and as individuals to read, to study, and to ponder this, but more importantly, to commit ourselves to listen to God, to hear His voice, and to do it, that the blessings may come. It's what we all long for. The next presentation, we continue the sequence by looking at the way ahead.